Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into something that literally changed the landscape of cinema forever. Between 2008 and 2013, the Iron Man trilogy did way more than just kickstart the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, it was the absolute birthplace of the modern hybrid blockbuster. We're going to look at how these films seamlessly merged groundbreaking visual effects, incredibly heavy practical engineering, and pure digital wizardry to create a visceral experience that still holds up beautifully today.
Okay, let's dive into this because, honestly, this was the ultimate filmmaking challenge. How do you take a pure comic book concept, a billionaire flying around in a brightly colored metal suit, and make the audience completely, undeniably buy into it? The secret wasn't just throwing money at computers, it was about building a very real, very heavy physical foundation first.
90. That is the staggering weight in pounds of the practical Mark I suit built for the very first film. Just imagine that for a second. Strapping 90 pounds of metal and leather to your body. It was an absolute monster of engineering. The performers could barely walk in it, let alone fight, fly, or look like cool, effortless superheroes. But that tremendous physical toll had a massive payoff, giving the visual effects artists absolutely perfect, real-world data to match when things moved into post-production.
Which brings us to Section 1, redefining the modern blockbuster. And straight into Section 2, forging the practical armor.
To ground Tony Stark's world in this gritty, almost documentary-style reality, director Jon Favreau turned to the legendary legacy effects to forge the physical foundation of the films. Let's look at what actually went into that 90-pound Mark I monster. It was assembled from thick epoxy armor shells, flexible urethane panels, real leather strapping, and a super heavy aluminum frame. And every single surface was deliberately distressed. They added simulated welds, torch burns, massive dents, and layers of grime. It perfectly conveyed the desperate, improvised nature of a guy building a life-or-death invention in a cave.
This brings us to a really fascinating dynamic, the stark contrast between the physical suits and digital CGI. Now, the physical suits were incredibly restrictive to perform in, but they reflected light naturally, they cast believable shadows, and they dented under real impact. CGI, on the other hand, offered limitless, dynamic potential for high-speed flight and combat. And this is exactly why these visual effects still holds up today. The filmmakers totally recognized that you needed the cumbersome real-world armor to basically teach the computers how the limitless digital counterparts should actually look and behave in the real world. Let's explore how they did that in Section 3, Mastering the Digital Suits. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer explosion in scale. Teaching those computers fell to the absolute masters at Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM. In the first Iron Man film, ILM delivered around 400 individual visual effects shots. But by Iron Man 3, that number had skyrocketed to over 2,000 VFX shots distributed across 17 different studios worldwide, including massive players like Weta Digital and Digital Domain. The workflow literally had to mature overnight to handle this massive global collaboration. To make the digital suits look undeniably real, the teams had to develop custom digital shaders. Think of these as highly complex algorithms designed to perfectly simulate real-world materials. Look at the Mark II. It used a matte military gray inspired directly by stealth aircraft. Then you have the iconic Mark III, which required a glossy, sports car-inspired red and gold finish. Getting these digital materials to react to light exactly like painted metal, complete with tiny imperfections, was a massive technical hurdle. So how did they actually pull it off? Well, it was a meticulous step-by-step pipeline. First, they scanned every single practical armor piece with high-resolution cameras. Second, they built millimeter-accurate 3D models, capturing every single rivet and brushed metal finish. Finally, they used image-based lighting. They pulled real photographs of the filming locations and projected those exact lighting conditions directly onto the digital geometry. This ensured that the photorealistic reflections perfectly matched the live-action footage they captured on the day. Moving right along to Section 4, capturing Tony Stark's essence. Of course, all this incredible tech wouldn't mean a thing if it lost Robert Downey Jr.'s charisma, his wit, or his vulnerability, right? The tech had to serve the human anchor. To capture that essence, ILM developed a groundbreaking technology called IMOCap, or Image Motion Capture. Robert Downey Jr. would wear a specialized black suit covered in hundreds of reflective markers. Multiple high-speed cameras recorded his every movement and expression. This meant that his signature swagger, his sarcastic gestures, and his subtle head tilts translated directly onto the digital armor. He never looked like a cartoon. He always felt like Tony Stark driving a very real machine. And the complexity of applying this motion data was just staggering. Take the famous Mark 42 assembly sequence in Iron Man 3. Animators had to perfectly choreograph 24 individual digital armor pieces flying onto the actor. On set, Robert Downey Jr. was performing completely blind to the final effect, just acting against green screen rigs and timing cues. But the iMocap data grounded his performance, making the chaotic interaction look utterly effortless and entirely believable. Let's switch perspectives in Section 5, inside the heads-up display. One of the absolute coolest elements designed by the VFX teams is the HUD, the glowing digital cockpit inside the helmet. It actually reacted to Downey Jr.'s real eye movements using 2 tiny cameras mounted inside the practical helmet. This drove a technique called artificial foveation, and this brilliantly illustrates the interface's intuitive design. It accurately simulated human eye tracking. That meant the vital information Stark was looking at stayed in sharp, crisp focus, while the peripheral elements subtly and realistically blurred out. These HUD designs weren't just cool sci-fi graphics either. They evolved dynamically and served as a brilliant storytelling device. The Mark II featured a busy, chaotic cyan color scheme loaded with mode-switching widgets. The Mark III streamlined things into a much cleaner, focused white Omega system. And contrast both of those with the Ironmonger, which used a stark, brutish red military aesthetic to perfectly reflect the villain's aggressive nature. Creating these HUDs was no small feat. In early tests, it required a mind-blowing 48 hours to render just one single frame of these intricate graphics. They had to be seamlessly composited over the actor's live-action eyes, with glass reflections, lens flares, and light illuminating the actor's face perfectly integrated into the shot. It took massive computational power to let audiences literally see the world through Tony Stark's eyes. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, the legacy of the MCU. When you look at all these elements working together, you really see how this specific hybrid filmmaking technique established the entire blueprint for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. They continually pushed the boundaries of visual effects as the franchise grew. In Iron Man 3, for instance, Framestore used advanced volumetric rendering to create the complex extremist virus simulations. They drew inspiration from real auroras and medical X-rays for over 150 shots, making glowing, volatile energy visibly flow right through the actors' veins and skeletons. They just kept innovating. It really is a masterclass in blending creative vision with cutting-edge technology to make science fiction profoundly believable. As our source beautifully summarizes, the suits may be fictional, but the ingenuity behind them was very, very real. And honestly, it begs the question, as Hollywood moves further into purely digital volumes and AI-generated worlds, are we ever going to see this kind of perfect 90-pound physical to digital magic again? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and for more, visit our website, Fair Solution.